Okay, thank you so much, Dirk and the team, for organizing this wonderful meeting, and also for having us on board from the statistics department at UNWTO. It really is always a pleasure to sit here with you, to learn from you, and to share with you, no? So today I'm happy to be sharing some of the developments on measuring the sustainability of tourism, program of work at UNWTO. As some of you know, because I see many familiar faces around the room, I'm happy to see many of you again. Measuring the sustainability of tourism is a program of work that UNWTO launched 6-7 years ago at the request of the UNWTO Committee on Statistics for a more harmonized and credible evidence-based for understanding the sustainability of tourism. So this is something that we have been working on, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. So, yes, thank you. So statistics is a key area of work at UNWTO, and it is in fact part of the mandate of UNWTO as a United Nations specialized agency. And so it's a very strategic area of work at the organization. As you will see on the screen, UNWTO is recognized by the United Nations system as the appropriate organization to collect, analyze, publish, and standardize the statistics of tourism, to continuously improve them, and to ensure and promote their integration within the United Nations system. Now, what does this mean? This means basically that we work towards ensuring and developing the measurement of tourism to ensure that it is perfectly harmonized and aligned with everything else that we measure in our societies, in our economies, and in our environments, to basically ensure that tourism is not considered as a silo, but is very much considered as part of the very economic systems, social systems, and environmental systems that tourism is very much a part of. So here you will see so far the two existing United Nations adopted standards for measuring tourism that UNWTO has led in the past. You may be familiar with them. On the one hand, we have a standard for so-called basic tourism statistics, not basic because they're simple, but basic because we understand that they are the basic information set that decision makers need to have about tourism. And this includes things like visitor, a tourist, an excursionist, their related expenditure, the different tourism industries. And the second one on the left relates to the economic contribution of tourism, the so-called tourism satellite account. So this is the international consensus, as they are both international consensus, but this is the consensus on how to measure the economic contribution of tourism. So things like tourism direct GDP, the value added of the different tourism industries, related employment, etc. No? Now, these were endorsed by the UN 15 years ago. And you know better than I that time has come to expand also the system of tourism measurement, the system of tourism statistics, to go beyond these predominantly economic considerations. No, we need to look at the impact and the dependencies that tourism has on society and on the environment as well. And also to consider perhaps the economic side of tourism from a more sustainability lens, right? So things like seasonality, for example, but also the characteristics of tourism industries, right? A large share of small and medium and micro enterprises are largely active in the tourism sector. So understanding the sustainability dimension of also the economic side of tourism is increasingly important. And so MST, or Measuring the Sustainability of Tourism, was born as a means to respond to the urgent need for guidance on how to produce more credible and comparable data on the economic, social, and environmental sides of tourism sustainability. As such, it is also very much an effort of moving beyond GDP. You might be familiar from the United Nations and from Secretary General Antonio Guterres himself. There has been a call for broader measures of progress to value what counts beyond GDP. And so the measuring the sustainability of tourism has in fact been recognized by the United Nations Chief Executive Boards as a prime and the only sectoral example that already moves in this direction of complementing GDP with complementary measures of progress. And so we could say that MST is very much a 360 approach to tourism. And I borrow the 360 approach, which is in fact something that our executive director, Zorica Rosevic, coined herself not too long ago. And I thought that was a very beautiful way of thinking about this, because it embodies a global consensus of the key concepts, definitions, and data organization structures for measuring the sustainability of tourism. And it does so across different dimensions, right? It looks at the economic, social, and environmental, but it also looks across the different territorial scales, so from global to national and subnational, and across different relevant areas of expertise. So the group that has been leading this, the expert group on MST, that I'll come back to in a little bit, has drawn experts from tourism statistics, from national accounts, from sustainability, from policymakers and decision makers on the ground, and also globally, from destination managers, and even from INSTO members such as yourselves. And by seeking the endorsement from both the tourism community and also the statistical community and the UN system, it strives for a very broad-based agreement, which brings legitimacy and harmonization to the measurement of tourism. Now, one important element also of MST is that it builds on well-established statistical frameworks, such as the ones I mentioned before, but also, and you might be familiar with them, because they have been endorsed also by the United Nations, the system of environmental and economic accounting, the system of national accounts, for example, which is currently being updated, and several standards of the International Labour Organization and OECD, and work of Eurostat also, for example. Now, here you will see, this is a brief overview, a conceptual overview of what the framework covers in terms of measurement areas. And you will see the economic system nested within the social system, which is in turn nested within the environmental system. And this helps us to also understand how closely related and interconnected these different systems are, and how important it is for us to measure tourism also in this nested and interconnected and holistic approach, no? So you see, we look at things like water and energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, solid waste, land use, ecosystems, and biodiversity. Of course, things like decent work, education and skills, also perceptions and attitudes from host communities, visitor satisfaction, very important parts of the more social sustainability of tourism. And so what the framework does is it provides the agreed concepts, definitions, and data organization structures for comparability of data. So this is something very, very powerful. So in the same way that it became possible to measure visitor in the same way, right? And that now we all measure visitor in the same way. We all understand it in the same way. We understand tourism in the same. It becomes possible to also measure and understand things like water use from the tourism industries in the same standardized way. And now, of course, not all the aspects of the framework will be equally relevant in all destinations, nor at all spatial levels. And what the framework does is it provides a menu, right, of the realm of possibilities that decision makers can go into. And the intention is to foster a demand-driven and modular implementation. Now, the development of our framework is just one part of the broader effort on MST, which also includes these different areas of work. So first and foremost is the engagement and consensus building. So the first thing also that was done was to set up a working group of experts, multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder, to pool that expertise and pool that leadership to develop and co-design this framework amongst all of us. And we are proud to have worked with Dirk and his team, and also several of you instos in this co-design development process of the framework, and hopefully turn it into something that you also find useful in your work. Another very important stream of work is the implementation of MST in countries. This has been very important because it tests the framework for both relevance. So how relevant is it to decision makers and policymakers, but also from the perspective of feasibility. Is it feasible to gather the information based on existing statistical systems and data sources available? No? And of course, the natural next step is to come up with a commonly agreed set of core indicators for international comparability purposes. And this is very important. It doesn't mean that this will be a set that all destinations or all countries need to implement, but it becomes a core set only for international comparability purposes. This is a parallel exercise to the framework itself. So it's a parallel exercise that we are just getting started on now in brief, but we would very much value also your expertise and having leaders such as yourself in this area on board to guide us in this process of developing this core set of international comparability indicators that will be the basis also for the expansion of UNWTO's statistical database in the future. A quick word just on the institutional setup of measuring the sustainability of tourism. Important for you to note is that this multidisciplinary and multi-stakeholder group kind of sits between two core stakeholder groups. On the one hand, we have the tourism community embodied at its highest level by national tourism administrations and the United Nations or the UNWTO General Assembly on the left. And on the right, we have the measurement community, the statistical community, and also the United Nations system embodied by the United Nations Statistical Commission, which will in fact be tasked with making the decision about this framework, whether it deserves to be adopted as a UN standard or not. No? And of course, the development of MST owes much to the valuable effort and collaboration of 44 pioneering countries and over 30 international organizations, as well as academic institutions and subnational entities such as the regional government of Andalusia, but also, as I mentioned before, some INSTO members such as those of the Canary Islands and the Aegean. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to you as well. Now that I see Sergio and Portugal have also been very active in the expert group, and they also have the very peculiar situation now of being newly elected members of the UNWTO Committee on Statistics. So you sit very nicely, spanning a very broad a stakeholder group, and we're very proud to have you on board as part of this work as well. And of course, warm thank you also to Raúl Hernández and Ioannis Pilanis, who have been very active members of the expert group on MST that have contributed a lot of their vision and expertise in co-designing this framework. So thank you very much to you as well. And now, because we all like data, or at least I hope, allow me to share with you some figures about this process. So there have been 13 formal versions of the statistical framework over these past 6 years that have undergone rounds of consultation. 9 research teams have been set up focused on different research topics. So we had one on the subnational measurement side, we had one on SDGs, you name it. We had 9 of these, and we had in total 67 members of these research teams involved in the work over the years. There were 6 editorial board meetings. So the editorial board is the entity that advises the expert group on the drafting of the framework itself. We had 5 expert group meetings, 6 high-level events, 21 discussion papers that fed into the framework, and a total of 27 country interventions at the United Nations Statistical Commission in New York, supporting this development. And as part of the high-level events, we had, of course, the United Nations Statistical Commission side events. We had of the International Statistical Institute. We had the Manila Conference in the Philippines, a very important one. in 2017 that I'll come back to in a little bit. But we also had a landmark high-level political forum side event. So you might be familiar with the HLPF, the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development Goals. Well, last June, we held a side event there, co-organized with the Ministry of Tourism and Sport of Croatia and with the support of the Ministry of Tourism of India, which was also holding the presidency of the G20 Tourism Working Group. And at this event, the MST work was quite prominently featured. Our executive director, Zorica Urošević, was part of the event, together with several ministers and other high-level representatives from academia and private sector. And in fact, the president of the United Nations General Assembly said that UNWTO's framework for measuring the sustainability of tourism will offer us more data and a better insight into challenges we are trying to solve. And our interest in MST is not only taking place at the global level, as I mentioned, in the UN system, but also at the subnational regional level. So we had the government of Andalusia, who hosted the last meeting of the expert group last September in Marbella. We are very grateful for this. And it was in fact here where the expert group agreed that the framework was ready for final global consultation and for presentation to the UNWTO Committee on Statistics and subsequently to the UNWTO General Assembly for its endorsement. Now, a few more figures. To date, around 28 pilots on MST have taken place in countries and subnational destinations around the world. And these are just some examples. And a further 25 countries have expressed interest to implement MST in the future. Now, as you will see from these examples, different countries and destinations focus on different parts of the framework in line, of course, with their priorities and their circumstances, right? Well, Austria, who is chairing the expert group on MST and co-chairing the UNWTO Committee on Statistics, has done quite a lot of work in this area. But one interesting finding I found relates to the regional employment attributable to tourism in different regions that go from 3.2 in Upper Austria to 16.3 in Tyrol, for example. So this, as you know very well, tourism, the concentration of tourism varies tremendously across territories. And having the data to back this up, to negotiate also within national governments, having data that is comparable not only between destinations, but also between those destinations and other economic sectors, and also with national level data, is extremely powerful to bring these messages across, right, to the policy level, to ensure policy coherence, and also to work towards ensuring that action on the ground really does correspond to broader policy and strategic ambitions, right? So I'm not going to read out the others. You're more than welcome to look through these slides yourselves, but we have examples from protected areas in Uganda, from South African region of KwaZulu-Natal, from Costa Rica, and from Indonesia, amongst others. And some of these are contained in the 2 publications that have been issued on MST pilots. You're welcome to download them through the QR code to learn a little bit more about them, and would be happy to in the future perhaps feature also some more work from the INSTO observatories in such publications. And now a brief summary of the process on MST so far. So we are at a very exciting point in time with this process, because we are nearing the end of the finalization of the framework, of the technical finalization of the framework. We are also consolidating the consensus, building around it, to be able to present this framework in a few months' time to the United Nations Statistical Commission at the end of February. And this will be this will be a very exciting moment, also considering that the UNWTO General Assembly has recently adopted the nearly finalized version of this framework in Samarkand in Uzbekistan recently. And as you will see, the work kicked off in 2016. This has been a multi-year effort, a co-design effort. And an important milestone, as I mentioned earlier, was the conference in Manila and with the Manila Call for Action, where also over 1,500 stakeholders, including ministers, including heads of national statistical institutes, including policymakers and destination managers, such as yourselves, came together and signed this Manila Call for Action to develop a statistical framework for measuring the sustainability of tourism. So that was really the kickoff for this work. And then we have the United Nations Statistical Commission that has been echoing its support throughout the years and has repeatedly also noted the interest of countries in this area of work. Before I forget, one other important milestone was the adoption by the UN of the methodology for linking. Now, this is quite technical, but bear with me, for linking the tourism satellite account with a system of environmental economic accounts. What does this mean? Basically, the methodology for linking the way that we measure tourism and the way that that environment is being measured can finally be linked up in a coherent and consistent manner. This methodology was also developed by the MST working group and has been endorsed and since then also incorporated within the framework. And so some recent milestones is the global consultation that also Ms. Urošević mentioned earlier. That has been taking place over these past weeks. It closed last week, and it was a final global consultation directed to the ministries of tourism and directed to the National Statistical Institutes as those two top-level key stakeholder groups to have a final round, a final look at the document. Of course, I mentioned before, we've had several rounds of consultation. We have been fortunate also to count on the input from Dirk and his team in this process. And so far, we have received quite a few responses showing that engagement and interest are still quite high in this work. And as I mentioned before, we had an extraordinary meeting of the UNWTO Committee on Statistics in the margins of UNWTO's General Assembly a few weeks ago. And their leaders from ministries and also national statistical institutes shared their vision on MST and also agreed that the time is ripe to take this for global consensus. And this was then echoed also by the UNWTO General Assembly, which adopted the nearly finalized version of the statistical framework. And 7 countries actively took the floor to support this, including Austria, Chile, Costa Rica, Croatia, the Philippines, Saudi Arabia, and Spain. So we're incredibly thankful for this because this then paved the way for the unanimous adoption of the framework. Now, as I mentioned, at this moment, we are culminating the technical developments and consolidating the global consensus for the final step of the framework, which will be end of February in New York. Now, to finish, allow me to just show some of the policy instruments that have also recognized the need and the importance of having a harmonized measurement framework for the sustainability of tourism. And these include the UN Secretary General's report on valuing what counts, but also different regional initiatives, such as the European Parliament resolution on establishing a EU strategy for sustainable tourism. We have also a sustainable tourism policy framework for the Pacific. We've had various outputs from the G20 group, including under the Saudi and the Indian presidency, and Brazil, who is now assuming the presidency, has also expressed interest in supporting this. And more recently, the more recent one includes the Palma Declaration on the path towards social sustainability of tourism in the EU, adopted by the European Union under Spain's presidency. So with all of this, I thank you very much for your attention and also for your contributions over the years. And I look forward to continuing the good partnership. Thank you very much.